Hey, all you Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think changing our workplace can change our world, we got to start with a massive emoji explosion. We got the one and only Laurence here, and we're going to be talking about mastering storytelling and branding. This session at the last SCCE, standing room only, so much positive feedback about it. You know, we had to bring it to the Ethicsverse. So as we get started here, drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. And drop in the temperature of where you're at, okay? In Fahrenheit, please, because I do not speak Celsius. If you're here for credits, this is the place to be. You can get up to 3 credits with CCB, SHRM, and HRCI. And of course, you know, we're going to be giving away some books. So we're going to be giving away 5 books from Hema and Ashley's new series. I really love this series. It's on my desk right now. And yeah, it's a full trilogy. So keep those comments coming in the chat. This topic today is going to be something that everybody, regardless of where you're at in your career, regardless of what industry you're in, you're definitely going to be able to take something from this. And you probably have some tips and some techniques of your own. So you got to share those here. So much of what we're going to be talking about is building our brand and building our network so that we have, you know, a stronger foundation for our careers and ultimately the impact we can have inside of our organization. We got a huge range of temperatures coming through the chat. Keep those coming, and also drop that LinkedIn URL in the chat and at least connect with one person today. Right below on the console, I think right below our beautiful smiling faces, you should see a link to the Ethico Year in Review. If you have not checked that out, today's the day to do it. We put out a ton of content last year, a ton of different toolkits that you can borrow from to magnify your impact in your program, to create some leverage for your team and drive more interaction points and more effectiveness in your organization. So if you have not checked it out, I'd encourage you to go check it out and take one thing from it. This is all free, okay? Ideas are free. It all comes down to execution, and there's a lot of ideas there for you. Also, I wanted to share our new platform. We're continually updating it. So those of you who have shared your insights, Ethico clients who have shared your insights, please keep those coming. We always want our tools to be tools that your team can actually use. At the end of the day, compliance can't be done without human beings. We're going to be talking about that a little bit today. But compliance is a human business. And so when we can activate the human sensors in our organization and our team can have software that it actually will use, that actually gives them information that they can take action on, we can really start to multiply out the impact that our small but mighty team can have on the organization. Our scope of responsibility continues to expand. The resources don't ever seem to keep up with it. So it's incumbent on you to have the right tools for your team so that you can make the right bets with your time. That's really what the game comes down to. All right, lickety split. I blasted through those. Let's get a massive one more set of emoji explosies. We are already up to 1,600. Okay, I had a good feeling about this one coming in. We're almost at 2,000. Laurence Hamel is here. And like I said, tell us a little bit about some of the feedback you got from this session, because if this is even a modicum of what you did at SCCE, I think people are going to absolutely love it.
Yeah, so my session at SCCE was really great. I was really shocked of the feedback I received because I didn't know that everybody has this topic in mind, but don't really know how to address this, how to tackle that. So after my session, I received people like reaching out to me saying how they tried to apply my tips and tricks that I discussed, or just like did the exercise of mapping their own branding, who they want to be, who they think they are, how their colleagues perceive them, and just doing that exercise and giving it an intention. Who am I and who I want to be? So some people, it really helped them just to have the right mindset, the right posture. So I'm super excited to share with your community here also some tips and tricks I developed in my career.
It's our community. If you're in it, if you show up, you're in it, okay? But you know, we never want to keep these conversations really kind of academic and theoretical. We want to bring this down to earth and to Laurence's point, create some actions that you can kind of take now. So we're going to be talking about some narrative structures, personal anecdotes, how you can really get leadership to listen, how you can position yourself strategically to be that go-to advisor inside your organization, and really master the art of adapting your communication style, your communication channels, and so forth to different stakeholder groups so you can increase your rate of resonance. So Laurence, let's start with, like, tell me a little bit about your background and what kind of inspires your passion for ethics and compliance.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a Quebec qualified attorney in Canada. You can hear it by my accent. I'm a francophone. I'm based out of Montreal. I started my career in law actually, that's a funny story because when I did my legal internship about 8 years ago, I started in a major pension fund in Quebec, and what's really interesting is that my first summer, there was a huge ethical scandal at the company. It was very big in Quebec. And at that point, it was a great opportunity for me to just, um, say, I'm here, I'm ready to work, ready to help. And in a time frame of one summer, we had to rewrite the entire code of conduct. It was like, I remember, sometimes I have flashback or PTSD, I don't know, but I remember just like being so involved in ethics, and this was like the way that I encountered ethics. So it was a great first experience, and since then I never stopped working in ethics. It really kind of lit a fire in me, and I completed my master in ethics, and now I'm also a university teacher, to show engineering students what ethics is and their duty as professionals.
Very cool. And that was probably some real PTSD because that was in the pre-AI days to rewrite a whole code of conduct. That was a different endeavor back in the day. So
You're
were there
right.
any like pivotal moments in your career where you started to realize that like communication skills were just as important or maybe even more important than the technical expertise that's foundational to ethics and compliance?
Yeah, well, if I take it from more an academic standpoint, we always hear that a code of conduct policies is just the tip of the iceberg, but the main and the most important part is really the culture, the ethics culture that we're creating in a company. And that is true, and that's a bit more academic, but if you put it in real life, it's also the same thing applies as ethics professional. Do you want to be just the tip of the iceberg, be there, have your role, be present, or you want to actually drive change and people reaching out to you and making a real difference? And I think like the first time I made that realization was like seeing different colleagues working and having a colleague working more like not being visible, not being active, waiting for an email to
Right.
come in. And so that proactiveness really struck me as, okay, this is what I want to be, because this is really what makes change in an organization.
Yeah, there's so many of us sitting at home with our hair done, waiting for the invite to the party, and we just have to
Yeah.
like step into that party. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Don't let me know a party's coming because I'll crash it. So, what do you think compliance? Why do you think so many of these compliance messages are often seen as barriers? How do you think we can start to change that perception? Because I think a lot of us feel that way. A lot of us feel like,
Yeah.
oh, I have to put this out, and then there's no engagement. It's like you're throwing your hook in the water, and there's no fish biting. How do we start to change that perception, and what kind of strategies do you think we should start thinking about?
Hmm. And I've heard so many times that ethics and compliance is not a sexy topic. It doesn't attract people. I personally think that is not true. It's my passion. It's my
Agreed.
professional passion. So, but we have to understand that it's not a passion of everybody. Your colleagues, most likely, they won't like ethics. They won't like this topic in general. It's probably not interesting to them, or they want to avoid it altogether. And I think one piece of advice is coming like knowing that employees will perceive ethics and compliance as the department of no, like roadblocks. Your policies for them are seen as roadblocks. So we really want to create that shift of like going from a very technical, role focused, and only available when something is wrong, to the opposite, like reframing our approach to align
Mm-hmm.
with business goal, to be there to explain the why, to really interesting them in what's in it for them. Like they can be affected personally. For some of my trainings, I always start with headlines of newspaper, with a face of a person that was there was an ethical scandal, and the newspaper are going to put your face in the headline, and you don't want to be in that position. So I always start by this kind of this alarm. You don't want to be the person that everybody looks like and thinks that they're not ethical. Okay, so coming from that, there's your why. what do we have to do? And I'm here to help you. I'm here to find a solution, but please call me before we're in trouble, you know? So like getting that narrative, it's so important, but you have to put your mind into a place that they're not, they don't believe in ethics. When you talk to them, you have to create that why, and that's super, super important.
Well, yeah, and you said my favorite word, which was reframe. You have to reframe what the function is, and to your point, connect it to those business objectives. You have to frame out why this stuff matters, and those headlines are great examples because those are, you know, tangible manifestations of how things go wrong. But that reframe to me is a very easy thing to do. It just takes some intentionality, but like, either the things we do matter or they don't matter. Either they actually drive better business results or they don't. They actually professionalize the business. They actually reduce the volatility or the risk of the organization or they don't. And if they do, which I think they do, obviously, then it's very easy to show and, you know, explain, to your point, the why of why this stuff matters by connecting it to the things that the audience cares most about. I want to pivot a little bit, though, talking to leadership, because this is, you know, I've been in this industry for like a decade now, and compliance people continue, in my experience, they continue to struggle with frame. You know, we've just kind of talked about framing it, reframing it for, you know, the enterprise, for maybe stakeholders on the front lines. We tend to, or it seems to me that we also struggle with like framing it properly for leadership. So when you think about like, what are some of the common mistakes you see compliance people make in trying to communicate and present to leadership? Is it the same kind of principles? Is there a different mix there?
And that's a great question, because sometimes we use a one size fits all approach, and we have to adapt our message to the audience. If you think about leadership are not going to react or, you know, seize the message the same way another employee would. You have to talk their language. You have to also, what I've seen with leadership is you have to say as much as you can in very little time, because they have a limited attention span.
IQ, yeah. Attention span.
Yeah, but you also have to talk to them in the language they speak, and it's usually numbers and business goals. You have to attach that to the business goals. And sometimes it helps having tables, having reports. I don't think with leadership they're going to read your full-on policy. It's easier to make an executive summary, things like that. And the same way for another employee, sometimes instead of the policy will be the ground. It's super important that you have that policy, but to ensure that the employee applies the policies, sometimes it's better to, you know, send a quick Teams message, or if you have other channels in your company, to use those channels and to understand how they are used. Talk to your communication team, understand where are the employees, because right now, time is of the essence in all companies. Employees, we want to limit the time they spend on reading policies, on doing training.
Totally.
We have to be effective, but you have to do your homework and know where your employee is. What does his day looks like? Can you maybe try to insert yourself in an ethics moment during a town hall, for example? Make it easy for the employee to grasp your message in terms of the channel of communication, but also the when during the day. It's super important, and you have to adapt it. Leadership, the IT team, the communication team, they don't speak all the same language. It's your job to do that homework and adapt.
So I know you hate when I say this, but I think it's all marketing. Or fine, I'll say it in a better way. I think it's like there's a lot we can borrow from our marketing departments in our organization to influence how we drive this kind of communication. What is the marketing team doing? They're trying to understand the ICP, the ideal client profile, right? We have a bunch of clients inside of our organization, all these different stakeholders that we're trying to serve, all these different stakeholders that we're trying to influence. If we speak to, you know, I've given this example 100 times, but if you speak to everybody the same way, you're not going to get the action that you're going to get if you can repurpose that message. If you watch Disney Channel, I think this is such a great example. That's why I just keep using it. But they have commercials they want you to come to Disneyland or Disney World or something, right? or they want you to go on a Disney cruise. Well, the commercials that are before like the kid shows are very different than the ones that are before the adult shows with the same thing intended. So they're speaking a different message to the parents of like all the memories they're going to make. For the kids, they're showing the character breakfast and all the fun times that they're going to have. So that is a way that they are sort of like living out this concept of repurposing message for a different audience. To your point, we can't, it's never a set it and forget it. There's never a silver bullet. Well, I'm going to send one message and I'm going to sit back and watch all this compliant behavior. It takes a lot of iteration. It takes a lot of content. You know, some commercials you see are 15 seconds. They're not all 3-minute long sort of like mini lectures. So we need to be able to kind of borrow from that and really understand those stakeholders, because to your point, if we can't speak their language, we don't understand what their day-to-day looks like, we don't understand what they actually care about, however can we create a resonant message?
And Nick, I like the parallel with the marketing industry. I think it's a great one because it's also the posture we want to be in. If you think about your usage of social media, how there's a new era of influencers that are hired by company to promote a product through, you know, anecdotal, friendly stories. They feel like they're your friends and you're going to pay attention and you're probably going to buy that product, or at least you're going to keep that in your mind because they feel so accessible. I'm thinking about all the TikTok influencers. Now we see sometimes in small letters, this is an ad. Well, sometimes we even forget. So I like this approach of us as ethics professional to put ourselves as accessible. I think there's a good rationale to be taken from that industry to be there, but it's important that we don't associate compliance and ethics with marketing, because at the end of the day, we're talking about regulatory consequences and, you know, actual consequences and breach of law and regulation and policies and potential like ethical scandals affecting the integrity. So that's why I try to avoid the use of marketing, because we don't want to have a greenwashing kind of approach. But there is something to be taken from that industry, and that we have to be accessible. We have to be there. People need to think about us when they face an issue, and they need to feel like we're there to help and not be police officers. That is super important, and it's a great takeaway from the marketing industry.
Yeah, I think to your point, if, you know, insofar as marketing is a bunch of false claims, we obviously don't want to like embody that, because then we just get into the whole greenwashing thing, which we saw, you know, I'll say it, that kind of killed ESG. The false claims, the lack of sort of like actual, I don't know, like action behind a lot of those claims. But if we can borrow, to your point, some of those principles of changing our message, you know, saying things 7 times, 7 ways across 7 different channels, trying to really kind of embody how can I make a message more resonant. I think we can see a lot of gains, because most everybody on this call today they have some kind of a compliance program, right? Like they have some kind of, you know, they have some sort of set of the major pillars of a compliance program that already exist. They probably have policies. They probably have a speak up line, right? Like they have some trainings and stuff like that. So what we're really talking about is kind of changing how we end up engaging, or how we end up sort of putting these different palettes, or these different paints that are on our palette, these existing pillars, to work on the canvas that is our company, in our company, in some more unique ways. So you talked a little bit about the difference between kind of being a barrier compliance officer versus being this strategic advisor. What are some ways that we can, and I want to circle back to the access and the influencer thing in a second, but what are some ways that we can show up? What are some talk tracks or some words that we can be sure to say that can help kind of break this stereotype that people tend to have about this function, that it is the Office of No, it's the anti-business, you know, department, all those kinds of things? What are some things that like we can say in our messages on a one-to-one or on a broader basis that can help to kind of, uproot that kind of stereotype that might exist in the company?
Yeah, and I think that's the question that everybody is asking themselves. And it's interesting the way you phrase your question. What can you say? Well, I would say, first thing, you have to be in the room. You have to be having the conversation. And for me, that is visibility. First step is be visible, be known, be present, be at the table where decisions are being made, where communications are happening. And this is how you can really influence in real time. So first, key aspect, be there. I know it's not probably your favorite answer, because that requires time, requires efforts from your
And some
part.
boldness. It requires a confidence and a boldness to step into some of those conversations sometimes.
It does, but you have to. And
Agree.
I think it's all about how you adjust your message. Again, you don't want to be seen as a roadblocker or, a police officer, but you have to make a point of being there during kickoff meetings, during cross-department strategy sessions, and be there. And a quick tip: arrive there early. Go get a coffee with the other team members, talk to them, ask them about their priorities, just interest yourself about what they're doing, because it's all about, and I know it's not a popularity contest, but they have to like you, to trust you. It's kind of the one of the bases. And I think there's a big difference between being liked and respected. You need their respect, but to achieve that, you need to know them. You need to know what keeps them up at night, and that takes time and visibility. You have to be there. And I agree with you, it's not easy, and you have to be audacious and sometimes invite yourself to the meeting, or say,
Right.
oh, how can I contribute, or to suggest, or like the best way I try to do it is to say, oh, I'm just going to take 5 minutes for a quick ethics moment. In my company, it's great because we have a culture of starting our meeting with safety moments. Well,
Great.
I also like to push for the ethics moment. It's a one slide presentation, and I talk about a quick topic. And it's because it's inserted in such an easy way. It does. People are going to accept that you are present at the table because you don't take a lot of time, but they're going to find it interesting also to see a different topic. So I think it's just about being visible, being there, and raising your hands to attend those important meetings.
Yeah, and I think it's also kind of having, that's a phenomenal foundation to focus on the other person, to really lower your self-focus, to get information about what they care about. That's going to give you data that you can use to obviously connect to their objectives or to connect to the business objectives. The other thing is it kind of feeds into, and I think also kind of having this bias for saying like, well, this is how we might be able to do it, or these are maybe the trade-offs, as opposed to doing the low IQ kind of just saying no to everything. Okay. Most of the compliance people I speak with are trying to serve. They're trying to leave the world better. They're trying to improve their organization. They're not trying to slam the door on initiatives and so forth. So I think really kind of leaning into that and highlighting that you are not this office of no or this police officer or whatever, and always kind of sharing that why behind the what that you're talking about is a great foundation. But then you've talked about being present. And I think this feeds directly into this other topic we were just talking about being kind of like taking a cue from these influencers. There's a great question from Robin, which we'll ask here in a second. But like that authenticity, when somebody can put a face to a program that they may have a misconception about, you can do a lot to shatter that misconception. And you can do a lot to break the pattern of what they expect and turn it into something new. You can reframe what your engagement is. So just being present, coming to those meetings, coming in, 5 minutes early and having a coffee with somebody and really kind of humanizing yourself. I think that does a lot to humanize the broader function and that function's intentionality, while also creating the space for you to show its connectivity, not as something that's just like apart from the business, but something that is like the lifeblood of the business, something that is going to allow us to achieve those goals in a more meaningful way.
Absolutely. And another quick tip, if you don't have the time because we're all so busy, put your face on a poster with what you do, how you can help them. Like in my company, we have a poster, all our faces of the ethics and compliance team, and we mention our main topics: conflict of interest, anti-corruption, and there's a big phone and our email address, and easy to reach out, because we want people to see us, but it can be just a poster. That's also super helpful.
Yeah, I just think anytime you can humanize yourself, like the odds of somebody quote unquote liking you is a lot higher. I have seen so many behind VH1 Behind the Music. Everybody still watches VH1, but like a band that I just totally hated because I hated their music, and then I watched this little mini documentary about them, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they went through what I've gone through. I can totally relate to them, and then I end up like liking that band and liking that music. I think like if we're ever going to get engagement, we have to humanize ourselves, and we have to have some of that kind of connective tissue. And to your point, like, you have to be likable at some level. Most of us all are. Those of you who are not, this is probably the story of your life. But like, most of us are likable. Most of us are trying to be giving and trying to improve our organizations. And I think having the confidence to let that light shine a little bit does a lot to really mobilize our program and drive our influence. The one and only Robin Green had a great question here, which we kind of talked about a little bit, but I'd like you to kind of address this directly. How can compliance leaders maintain authenticity while still creating a strategic personal brand?
That's a great question. And the answer is in the question, actually, because a huge part of personal branding is authenticity. When you do your exercise, or if you did it in the past, your exercise of your personal brand, who I am, what are my core values, what are my goals, who are my audiences, authenticity should drive this whole exercise. Personal brand is not about reinventing yourself or saying like, okay, tomorrow I'll be that person that does that. No, it's about knowing who you are and putting keywords to that and doing it in intention. And one part of the exercise of personal branding I like to do is I always like to have a soundboard person to tell me if is my exercise speaking to you, like, is that how you perceive me? To kind of see, having that, mirror effect, because sometimes we're in our echo chamber, we think that's how people perceive us. So having a more objective vision on the exercise, but authenticity should drive that whole exercise. Thinking about what your own motivations are, what are your personal goals in your career, what are your strengths. This should drive the exercise of finding those maybe 3 keywords, 3 buzzwords. That's how you want people to perceive you. But authenticity should be a huge part of that exercise.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I don't think you can have, in today's day and age, I don't think you can have a strong strategic personal brand without that authenticity piece. I think we are now very wired to search out and seek out authenticity because we're just bombarded with so much stimulus across social and across all these different mediums, And so I think I'd love to talk a little bit more about that exercise. What are the nuts and bolts of that exercise, and how can somebody actually put that to work?
Yeah, so the way I did it at the SCCE session, I printed a personal branding canvas with different sections, but there are so many templates out there. But you have to think basically about the main questions to define your personal brand as a professional, as an ethics professional. And one of the key section is, as I mentioned earlier, your core values. Like, what are the principles that guide you? Is it honesty? Is it accountability? Is it courage? And those are your core values that are authentically yours since forever, that you want to embrace even more, and you want people to see that in you every time you interact with them. So listing your core values. After, you can have you have your section about your strength and your skills. What are you good at? Why are you mentioned, like before, the best compliance officer was someone very, very knowledgeable. Well, this is still relevant. You need that knowledge. So your strength can be your knowledge. It can also be your communicating skills. That's also a great one. If you're good you're good at conflict resolution, that's a great strength as well. So writing down your skills, your best strength, that's also a good exercise to have an honest view of who you are and what you can bring to a team and a company. And that leads to the next one. What is your unique value proposition? And this one is kind of fun because it really needs to answer what sets you apart as an ethics and compliance professional. Is it because you always people like you are remembered for something? Is it because you bridge the gap between the legal requirements and the everyday operations? Like, what is your unique value proposition? And it's interesting to write it down as, what do you currently bring to the table? What is your current value proposition? But also take a step back and think, what do you want to be? What do you want your value proposition to be like? Your ultimate goals, for example. So that's also interesting to do it in like a present. time, but also in the future, like what do you wish for, and
Mm-hmm.
seeing if there's any gaps between those two definitions. Also including your key audience and target stakeholder, because that's also going to influence the way you phrase your brand. Um, and the final one is basically your goals. Where do you want to take that brand, also like that future mindset, because this is what you want to work towards, to find out who you are and who you want to be perceived and seen, what are your objective. And again, authenticity leads this whole exercise, because if it doesn't feel authentic to people, it won't stick and you won't be
Exactly.
remembered for. So yeah.
So much to say about what you just said. The chat is absolutely blowing up. I can see why this was the best session at SCCE. I want to talk about another kind of good thing to kind of add to that is if you go to a close group of people, both inside of work and outside of work, people on your team, maybe other kind of counterparts, other friends, and ask them to describe you in a few words, that'll give you a picture as to like how close you're actually showing up to how you think you're showing up, because we all lack self-awareness, right? Like we're not staring at mirrors all day. You don't actually know how you come across. Or maybe that's just something that I'm plagued by, but like getting a picture on like what those current gaps might be can give you some good context on those aspirational qualities, those goals, those ways that like you want to show up. That's one, to kind of validate where you're at and where you're trying to go. The other point to make about this authenticity thing, and just to maybe say it a different way, like if you zoom out of your work life and just look at your whole life, where are the closest relationships you have? Maybe it's a sister, maybe it's a sibling, maybe it's your best friend or neighbor, or somebody that you went to college with. Those people know the authentic you. They know the real you, right? Like they are connected to the real you without all of these professional facades or these work facades that like we end up sort of like accumulating and wearing around like a carapace or a piece of armor. So what I found is that as you can tear down those pieces of armor and try to show up more authentically, you can kind of multiply out the type of authentic relationships that you have outside of work where maybe you feel more safe. And those can really be a foundation for your personal brand that's more sustainable. There's less mental energy that you have to take in making sure that your armor is on, So trying to recreate those things and really trying to lead with that authenticity, I think can do a lot to give us a clear direction on where we want to go.
I agreed. And actually, if I can take just a few minutes to share, earlier during this webinar, you asked me about the feedbacks I received from my session at SCC. And I didn't know if I wanted to share this, but I feel like it's a good segue. A person told me that he completed the exercise of the person branding canvas, and he realized that, oh, maybe I'm not, and he was not in compliance, he was in another sector, but he realized with the personal branding exercise that maybe he was not doing the job that he should do. His authentic, because we always say when you're doing, like you're on your, we call it in French, on your X, when you're on your spot, like you're doing the work that you should be doing because it aligns so much about with your strength, with your personality. It's really when you're at that spot that you thrive the most and you have the most success. And I think doing this exercise can be, if you do it really with intention and you take the time to think about your true self, it can also reveal so much about yourself. And are you in the right team? Are you in the right position? Are you in the right company? It can be a hard exercise to do if you really give it some time and attention. And it can lead your career to maybe a next step that is more aligned to yourself and who you want to be, what you want to, like how you want to serve ethics or your field, your true passion, basically. So I think it's a good exercise that can be very meaningful if you give it some space and attention.
Yeah, and to your point, it can be very revealing, and it can even set you off on a new path or raise your awareness about something in your current situation that just isn't working. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of tailoring our message a bit. Man, this should have been a 2-hour session because it feels like we're kind of just getting going. You really are an expert on this stuff, and this is something that I think we all can kind of get better at. But what do you think are some practical ways to start thinking about tailoring our compliance messages for different audiences?
So we discussed it a bit, but knowing your audience is probably the main key aspect. Doing your homework about them, taking the time to meet them, to know what keeps them up at night. And earlier we talked about, inserting yourself in their bigger reunion sessions, to really make an impact, a quick impact, but asking them what is important for them in ethics, or what gaps they see in the ethical behavior of their teams. I think being humble and going to a leader and asking them, how can I help you, or how can I adapt my messages to you? I think involving the leader in that discussion and that initiative is super super helpful, because
Totally.
people like when they're engaged, and they're more likely also to spread that message. So I think involving the leaders in the way that you're going to shape the message to spread to their teams is super super important. Knowing the format of your communication, the channels, knowing what channels are available in your company, and maybe the right channel doesn't exist yet. Creating, and this is something I talked with a colleague in ethics and of another company. After an assessment, they found out that they have such a lean team that is not able to respond to all the company's need in terms of daily questions, that they created a chatbot for ethics questions, because they always they were always sent the same question. So having a chat box AI that you feed, the right information, the right response, and the right parameters to know that they're framed, not to say too much. But that is a great channel also to put ethics forward, because I know we talk a lot about ourselves as individual professional compliance officers or professionals, but it's also about how to make ethics shine and be visible. It's
Right.
all about making a company more better equipped to face ethical dilemmas. And I think it's our job, it's our role to do so. But you can kind of duplicate great initiatives and leverage technology such as AI, and that's going to bring impact also to the professional that you are and the company that you work for. So knowing the channels, and knowing if a channel is missing, create one.
Um, Man, I'm so inspired from this. The chat is totally inspired as well. This is really, really awesome. Okay, let's talk a little bit about body language, because I think we often overlook non-verbal communication. So talk to me about how important body language is in building trust and credibility, both in terms of like presenting to a group or just on a one-on-one basis. How can we start thinking about body language and really using that to our advantage?
Yeah, and it's so important, and people don't think about it. They underestimate the power of body language, and especially to create a trust relationship. It's all about body language. We talked about being accessible, people seeing themselves in herself, like having that proximity effect, but they need to see you as a human being. They need to understand what kind of person you are, and that, like, I think, I don't want to misquote the stat, but I think 80% of communication is nonverbal. So you have to use that nonverbal aspect to your advantage. And I think first is to know the effect that you project on people. Nick, you mentioned the fact that we don't always have the right self reflection, and do the
Yeah.
exercise of filming yourself when you present, or asking, you know a peer, a colleague, what they think, what emotions they feel when you talk. Do they feel like they can trust you? Do they feel intimidated by you? That's super important to acknowledge when you do a presentation, but not only for presentation purposes, one-on-ones. When they meet you in the street, how do you present yourself? So it's so important to first understand what you represent when you present, and you're there. And I think, like, a great example that comes to mind is, when you start a new job, you can be shy. You're not maybe going to master your body language as much as when you're in a comfort situation. And it's crazy, because the one time when I started recently at this job, I met a colleague, and I was, more shy. I was not myself yet. I was more in a, paying attention stage in that new job. And a few months ago, I met the same colleague, and he did not recognize me. He
Wow.
because I was so different, because now I'm much more confident. I have an open posture. I make eye contact. I'm more warm, and before I was more shy. And it's crazy. We cannot underestimate the power of body language. And I think one tip: film yourself. Ask a colleague how they perceive you when you speak on one-on-one. And again, thinking, if we're looping it to the personal branding, is that what effect you want to have on people?
Right.
Does
Does
it
that
match your
overlay with
brand?
your goal? Exactly.
Exactly, because in like an investigation context, you're not going to have the same tone, and that's perfectly acceptable. When you meet a leader for the first time, you have to create it's, and also, and that could be a second session I do at SCC. I met one of my friends. She's a stylist. She works in clothing, and she told me, and I was discussing those topics with her, and she told me to not underestimate the power of how we dress. Our
Yeah.
clothes speak a lot. And the colors, the texture of our clothes, it also all comes in. How do you want people to perceive you, and the energy? And I think there's a lot also to talk about in that spectrum of clothing, body language, and owning also your tone, your pace, your confidence. And it's the great news. It's something that you can work on. I know some
Totally.
people are more gifted of that, but you can work and you can improve also the way that you present yourself.
Yeah, and we communicate so much in impressions. They're not going to remember, these 5 minutes that you pop into a meeting, or if you do an intro to a new class of people that are joining your organization and you get 10 minutes to talk about the compliance program or talk about the ethics program. They're not going to remember all those words. They're going to remember what that impression is, and that colleague that you met in your first week when you were still in your kind of self-preservation mode, not being your full self, had an impression of you, a picture of you in their mind that didn't really correspond to this other person that they met later. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to just show up with a little bit of confidence, because again, it either matters or it doesn't. Either a compliance, either we're all living a farce and a compliance department is really just a bumper sticker on the car, or it's something that can actually improve the business. If it's the latter, we should come to those conversations not assuming the worst. Like, if I assume you're not going to like me, you're probably not going to like me. If I assume that you think everything I'm saying is stupid, well, then I'm probably going to have some different defensive body language. I'm probably going to, the odds of me, let's just say, leaving that impression are always going to be a lot higher, right? So we have to really think about, like, foundationally, like, who we are and who we want to be, to your point, back to that exercise. And when we're feeling those feelings of insecurity, that's not proof that we don't deserve to be in that room. These thoughts of like imposter syndrome are not proof that, like, yes, you're an imposter. They're just proof that you're a human being, and we all have these kinds of feelings. And so being able to compartmentalize those, and to your point, look at ways that we can show up in better ways, it really does start to cascade, and it really starts to multiply, and it really starts to give people some actual authentic handles to hold on to and connect themselves to us. Because if we're not humanizing our program, we're not humanizing ourselves, we're not trying to build our brand and improve ourselves, then we're going to keep getting the same outcomes that we as an industry have been getting for the last 10 years.
Absolutely.
Okay, I got so many questions in the chat. You want to go to some questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So Cheryl Chang has a great question. Thanks for this, Cheryl. How can compliance team members increase visibility in organizations with multiple locations? This is something that a lot of people struggle with because work from home, distributed workforce, and so on. How do we create some of these opportunities to have more visibility?
So one quick tip I mentioned is creating posters with your face on it, being more accessible in that sense. If you're using, you have an intranet, make sure that ethics is visible, but always add that like face component. It really does make a difference. Of course, roadshows. Roadshows are a great, powerful tool. Actually, traveling and going to, your different locations, it takes time, it takes budget, but it's an exercise that really make a difference. But and last time I traveled to a remote office, I traveled for the full week, but on Monday and Friday, there was nobody at the office. So again, try to take into account that behavior component to your employees, knowing where they are. Are they on site? Are they at the office? Or where do they eat lunch? And try to be there. So doing your homework, knowing the behavioral of your employees and trying to match that. So of course, yeah, as I mentioned, some low-hanging fruit posters being more visible in the intranet, but sometimes you have to get there, meet people, shake hands. That there's nothing like face-to-face to create trust. It takes time, it takes budget, but it's worth it. And it's a case that you must defend to your finance people when they decide on budget, because if you want to create that culture and not just have the tip of the iceberg of policies and tick the box compliance, you need that trust aspect to be developed.
And I say, like, you have to fight for that. Like, there's always budget to send somebody on an airplane to go somewhere else. Like, there just always is. And it's super critical. And the CFO who's maybe saying no to it, they might not understand the importance of this fascia, or the creation of a healthy fascia, this connective tissue throughout the organization to reinforce this ethical culture that ultimately leads to these better business results. So I think we have to have the confidence to fight for that.
If I may, Nick, please. I would also add one component to make your case to your finance people to, let them know how important it is to go and travel on site. It's also to demonstrate them how you're going to use your time there wisely. And every time I go abroad on another office location, I'm always very, very cautious of how I can make the most impact while I'm there. How much meeting I can organize. If I can, am I going to be there during a big town hall that is already organized? So pack your schedule, pack your agenda with meaningful sessions where you can have the best reach to your employees, knowing where they are, knowing what's going on in the office. Is it a bank holiday where you're going? So knowing all of that, and that's going to help you make your case to your finance people to try to have an estimate of the impact and your reach when you're going to travel. So that's also a great way to demonstrate it. And we didn't talk much about storytelling, but using storytelling here also to make your case, to really explain how you can avoid bigger consequences that have more financial repercussion if you don't get on site and shake their hands, so they can trust you and they can call you if they face an ethical dilemma. So use that storytelling. Make a story, create a story about how, and it's, when I say create a story, I don't mean invent or lie about something. There's data out there to demonstrate how important it is to be visible and present, and it does help and limit the risk of other financial repercussion. So speak the same language as your finance person and explain that it's a better decision if they spend a few $1,000 sending you abroad than having a big ethical dilemmas that's going to create reputational consequences.
My dad always said, if you can't afford the gas, you can't afford the car. And like, they already have the car. They're spending all this money on salaries in the department, tools for the department, and so forth. You have to put some gas in that engine, and we have to drive, again, that connective tissue to turn this from a barnacle on the ship to something that actually can, push that ship forward. I want to talk, I do want to get to storytelling here in a second, but my gosh, we're going to have you back ASAP, because there's so much that we haven't even covered here. Phenomenal, really phenomenal. This has been a fun session, huh? We're just kind of scratching the surface. So there's a lot of people. Here's the elephant in the room. There's a disproportionate, number of people in our space that are introverted. And I think introverts in general are uncomfortable with self-promotion. What's one small step that you would encourage someone to reframe that quality they may have as part of their identity, to start kind of approaching this personal brand problem, which you're proof it can be so effective and can really knock down some of these silo walls that some of us feel like we're kind of trapped in between?
First, again, authenticity. If you're an introvert, that is totally fine. You don't have to be the most extroverted person or the person that speaks the loudest in the room. Usually, it's counterproductive. It's all about listening. Being a listener is a key aspect, and usually introverts really master that skill. So, but one thing, and this is more for a posture, a mindset posture to keep in mind, sometimes, and it's also links with the imposter syndrome, the fact that your message is so important. You have a role in a company to protect the integrity of your business. For me as an attorney, as a practitioner in ethics for so long, it's a duty that we have. So if it's difficult for you, think about the importance of your subject. Bring it back, and that should give you the strength to put your message out there. If you don't do it for you, do it for your message.
Yes.
Your message needs to be out there, and your voice is the right one to do so. Maybe if you're an
Ooh, I got
introvert,
chilled from that. I got chilled from that.
but
I love that.
it's so important, because we all have different personalities. We have
Totally.
and we also have sometimes bad days that we don't have the same confidence. But always think that you have a duty. You're the person that protects the integrity in your company, and you are the right person to do so. And you are the person that's going to bring that message out there. And if you don't think the people in the room are going to listen, if it's a small meeting and you know there are big personality out there, one thing that I do sometimes, I call the other people that are going to attend the meeting and I introduce them my topic. And so
Smart.
when I talk about it, they know about it already, so they're gonna bounce on it, they're gonna talk, they're gonna be also like champions of my message, because
Right.
before the meeting I call them, I introduce them to the topic, the importance. If you're better on one-on-one, that's a great way to do it.
Totally.
So thinking about, and it's, you have to think about what's going to happen or anticipate the future, and try to mitigate what the consequences. If you think you're not going to be able to put a word in that conversation, call the person, the leaders, and the I mean, not the leaders in terms of the hierarchy, but the person that takes the most space in the meeting, and try to influence them to champion your message.
Exactly. Yeah. Use them as a mouthpiece. The other thing I would say or add to that is that introversion is really a superpower. Introverts are usually, the people that say to other people, man, I can't believe I'm telling you this. That person's probably an introvert, right? Like the person listening is probably an introvert. So introverts build a lot of trust quickly because they're external focused. They're better listeners. They're, introverts, they say, are just extroverts with like better taste. And so if you have an introverted slant or an ambiverted slant, which means that you're just an introvert, use that as an advantage to do those kinds of things, to have those one-on-one conversations, because we kind of live in an extroverted world, and you can start to feel a little bit like less than in these kinds of conversations about building a brand and making those connections. At the core, it's just authenticity, and it's building kind of relationships. So use that superpower that you have. I have one quick question from Taylor, and then in the last couple of minutes, we're going to scratch the surface on storytelling, I promise. And we have to have you back because I've never seen anything like it in the chat. Taylor asked this question, great question. But what about the people at the bottom of the totem pole that work in compliance and you don't get the same respect as your leaders? What would you tell that person? Is there any different framework for them? Is there any different recipe for those folks?
I love that question, and I promise it's not me asking, the audience to ask those questions, but this is probably one of my favorite questions, because, leadership, when we think about leadership in a corporate setting, we think about, the high management, the leaders in terms of hierarchy, but you can be a leader at the bottom of the hierarchy. You can be a leader anywhere. Your role, your title doesn't define the power of influence that you have. That's first key aspect. And you can see that in so many different ways. Middle management have sometimes more influence power than the upper management.
100%.
So it's all about that trust. And I remember one of my mentors said to me when I was younger, when a person trusts you, wherever you sit in the hierarchy, and you can tell them to, scream bananas in the street, they're going to do it because they trust you, and they've seen how much when they listen to you, they avoid risk. And that's for a person.
Right.
Usually a person's reputation is so important to them. And when you help them protect their reputation, they're going to trust you, whatever your title is. And so it's really about building that trust. But you can do that wherever you are in the hierarchy. You can do that whatever your title is. It's all about the connection that you make in the network.
Yeah, and I think if you've made that connection, then you've carved out some sort of mental real estate in their mind for yourself or for the impression you've left with them. And that's going to hopefully flare up should they come to a situation where they need some help or they need a question answered or whatever. Okay. I've never seen anything like it in the chat. They're like, can you come back tomorrow? Can you come back next week? So I'll have to see we'll have to see when we can get you back sooner, because this could be a follow-on session. I want to talk a little bit about storytelling, though. You've talked about storytelling as a superpower for E&C professionals. You've given us a couple of examples of how you've been able to kind of leverage that in a high way, or at kind of a high level, and some anecdotes on how we can kind of start to think about it. Let's kind of get even more tactical about it, and maybe give us some examples of how people can start to use storytelling in a more impactful way, kind of today or this week, ultimately to influence some more outcomes in their organization.
Absolutely. And for me, storytelling really made a difference in my career and how people perceive me. And I'll give you maybe one exercise to do in the next few days. Because I said earlier, we don't want compliance to be seen as the department of no. But sometimes we have to say no. Sometimes there are risks, sometimes it's the gray zone, or sometimes it's really clear that it is a no-go and it should be a no-go. So how do you reconciliate a no with storytelling? So my exercise for you is, next time you have to say no to someone, to an initiative, to a project, whatever it is, because it creates too much ethics risks. Instead of saying no and explaining the why, start with the why, but improve it and say it in the way that it will resonate with people. Use an example, because in a nutshell, storytelling is all about the fact that data or just policies, they're not going to stick to people. They're really dry. People are not going to adhere to it. But stories and emotion, this is where you're going to get adherence. So use that story and that emotion piece. And again, you have to know who you talk to hit home for them. So knowing how to say no. And also there's another key aspect, and we don't have much time today, but knowing what is worth defending or not, that's a huge piece also for ethics professionals. But when you do have to say no, say it in a way that triggers their emotion and that speaks to them. Use examples. I mentioned you the headline stories sometimes I do to create an impact, but take the time to rephrase the narrative and to say no in a way you won't have to say no, and it will almost makes the person thinks that they think it's a no, and they came with the conclusion, the outcome that it's a no. Instead of you saying no to them, make them realize why, so they come to the conclusion that it's a no. That's a whole exercise in itself. It's a challenge. I challenge you to try it, but it's once you master that, it's crazy the results.
Well, I mean, if they are ever going to come to that same conclusion on their own, at some level, to your point, they are going to feel about this topic or about this question the way you feel. And that it's usually driven by giving them the why. A story, like any regulation, any policy, it's the result of some cautionary tale of some train going off the tracks or some car going off of the road, right? Like that's why these guardrails are sort of put in place. Many times we roll these things out without that why and without that story. A story is such an efficient packet of information that can convey ultimately a conclusion or ultimately a lesson. And so this other thing you said, so I love everything you said, and I also love how you talked about this emotional piece. Logic makes you think, emotion makes you act. You can spend all day talking logic. If there's no if there's no pathos in that, nobody is ever going to take any action. And I would just encourage you, open up a new tab, go to YouTube and look up a perfume commercial, a cologne commercial. That is all vibes. They're not talking about what's in the cologne or even what it smells like. It's just some fit guy diving off of a cliff, you know what I'm saying? And some woman on a yacht, right? Like it's all just vibes. And like that is meant to generate an emotional response. And those marketing teams continue to put out those kinds of commercials because they end up leading to sales. And so we have our own sales to make inside of our organization. They're points of influence. And we are largely, I'm painting with a broad brushstroke here, we're devoid of this this emotion and this passion that many of us feel about this space. Like, you're very passionate about it. I'm very passionate about it. There's a bunch of, look at the chat. There's a bunch of passionate people that are totally animated by building a more ethical world for the generations that are coming behind us. We have to feel comfortable letting that emotion into the conversation. We have to feel, that panic that comes from winding up in the headlights. We have to show those stories if we're ever going to increase the odds of even resonating on an emotional level with the people that we're trying to influence.
Yeah, and there's so much to try in that field, in the sense that even a training, you can change a training to an experience. The person is going to learn so much more when it's an experience versus a training, a lecture. So there's so much to be done in that field. Yeah.
Oh, you're a genius. Let's get one more massive emoji explosion. What are we up to? Oh my gosh, 8,000 reactions, all thumbs ups and hearts. I love it. Laurence, thank you so much. This was really a phenomenal episode. The replay will be on YouTube. We're of course going to be back next week with more phenomenal content, but Laurence, we got to have you back soon. Thank you so much. This was an absolute pleasure. See you next week.
Thank you. My pleasure. Take care.